Hey all, my name's Tor and welcome to part 4 of FtM ABCs. As you can see by the title, D is for dysphoria. Let's get right into it. In this video, I really just want to educate cisgender or not transgender people about what we go through, and then also just give some comfort to trans folks to know you're not alone, and a lot of us go through dysphoria every day of our lives. So before I really get into the different kinds of dysphoria that a lot of FTM trans folks face, I want to just give you a brief definition for those of you who don't know. So from Google, the definition of dysphoria is a state of unease or generalized dissatisfaction with life. So when it comes to trans people, this often has to do with our bodies or the social constructs around us. So when it comes to trans people, there are 3 dysphorias that I see come up quite often. We have social dysphoria, body dysphoria, and gendered dysphoria. So because I really only know my story and what I've been through, I'm going to be sharing all of these from personal experience. But I want you to be aware right now that not everyone experiences all or any of these kinds of dysphoria, and that doesn't make them any less trans or any more trans. So getting right into social dysphoria and what that means for trans people is really different person to person, as with many things. But the rough idea of it is based on the gendered norms and social constructs that have been built in our society. So that includes, but is not limited to, things like gender roles, your name, your pronouns, the things that our society defines as man or woman. So for me personally, some of the first signs in my head that I was transgender was coming from social dysphoria. So these were things like I cut my hair at a really young age, as you see here, and I always wore boy clothes growing up, and I just always felt a slight unease with the general female roles. I played lots of sports, and I never wanted to be seen as like somebody's daughter or sister, and I never wanted to grow up to be somebody's wife. And I think this is often the dysphoria that shows signs in young people who realize they're trans at a young age, like myself, is that social dysphoria. And it comes in many different forms for many different people, but for the most part I think it comes down to a sense of disassociation with their gender. So a lot of different trans people have a lot of different triggers for different kinds of dysphoria, but I think some of the more common types of triggers for social dysphoria, and ones that I know have affected me a lot personally, are things like dead naming people. So using their birth name or their old name, using their old pronouns, things like that. But then a big one is just being forced into those boxes of man or woman can really mess with people's heads and hurt quite a bit. So the second type of dysphoria I want to talk about is body dysphoria, and this is again quite common among trans people, and it comes up in a lot of different forms for a lot of different folks. So body dysphoria really roots in this whole concept of my brain doesn't match my body. I have a male brain and a female body. And so a lot of trans people will go on hormones or go get surgeries to try and help align their body with their mind. Body dysphoria can really show itself in a lot of ways that cisgender folks might not expect. So there are obviously the big ones that a lot of people hear about, chest dysphoria, bottom dysphoria, that a lot of trans people go through. But there are lots of other things that you personally might not think are gendered in your head or in most people's heads. But to a lot of trans people, it becomes a gendered thing in our minds, and it becomes something that makes us less than or not trans enough or things like that. So for me personally, I've battled with body dysphoria around my weight and my stature and my height and my hair and so many different things, the way clothes fit. Even though if you saw me on the street, for the most part, you'd probably assume I was a cisgender guy. But yeah, for me personally, body dysphoria has been something that really only embedded itself after I came out. It was a realization of this is not the body I'm supposed to be in. And that's a really difficult thing to fight with, is being in a body that is not your own, that does not match your mind. And I have yet to find a good way to describe what that feels like, because it's such a surreal experience to be in a body that does not belong to you. But I read this book a few years back called Red, and it is about a blue crayon with a red wrapper, and I think that book, if you haven't read it, you definitely should, because it really helps tell the story of body dysphoria. I am a blue crayon. My brain knows that, my family knows that, my friends know that. We all know I'm a blue crayon. But I unfortunately got mislabeled when things went through and I got a red label on me. And so I have to fight with that every day, that people think of me by my red label. They're never going to just think of me just a blue crayon. And that also ties into this whole idea of why don't we just get trans people like mental help. Turns out, our brains are chemically and structurally different than that of my female counterparts, and more similar to my male counterparts. And second, wouldn't it be much easier to take off the red wrapper of that crayon and put on a blue one than get a whole new red crayon just to go in that wrapper? If my mind functions like a blue crayon, we should be able to quickly switch my body to match that. I think body dysphoria is the dysphoria that cisgender people think they understand the most, but actually understand the least. Because for the most part, cisgender people think it is really just surrounding like our reproductive organs and stuff. But for a lot of people, that rarely comes up in their mind. For a lot of people, day-to-day activities can trigger their body dysphoria. You know, things like when I'm working out, I automatically feel too skinny and think I look feminine because of that. Or just like getting my hair cut, it has to look a certain way because otherwise I feel feminine. Just little things like that that wouldn't come up in your life necessarily. And then there are things that are slightly more obvious that you might be thinking about, things like going to the washroom, showering, things like that. Seemingly simple tasks can be so painstakingly difficult for trans people who experience body dysphoria. And those simple, necessary things can be anxiety-inducing and stressful and downright horrifying for people like me who experience body dysphoria. So the last type of dysphoria I want to cover today is called gender dysphoria, or that's what I like to call it. And that's pretty much the idea of being forced into a female and male role. So being misgendered. So if someone were to call me a girl, that would be misgendering me because I'm a boy. Things like that, where you are assumed to be the gender you do not identify as. And this is something that happens to most trans people throughout their transition before they do what's called passing. So passing is pretty much the act of being seen as the gender you identify as. And if a trans person does not pass, they will often be misgendered. And there's no light way to put this. It hurts like a bitch when that happens. Okay? It's uncomfortable when a stranger does it because they don't know you're trans and they don't know that they hurt your feelings. But it's outright discrimination when somebody you know who knows you're trans does that on purpose. They're harassing you about your gender identity. And guess what? That's illegal in Canada and some states in the US. But people still choose to do that time and time again, and no one takes us seriously when they do. It's an emotional experience to get misgendered, especially early on in your transition when you're first coming out and starting to try and be proud of who you are. Getting shut down and pushed down like that is really painful. But I personally believe it's even harder nowadays when people purposefully or even sometimes accidentally misgender me, because I've worked so hard. I've spent years and years getting to this point just for someone to tell me that I still look like a girl in their mind, or I am still a girl in their mind. So a little message to anyone who's cisgender and watching this. I want you to know, first of all, thank you for taking the time to educate yourself and try to learn about trans issues, whether you have a friend or a significant other or a family member who is transgender, or you're just doing this to be a better person. Thank you. Because our voices get quieted all the time while yours are listened to. So thank you for using your privilege to help us each and every day. And to anyone trans who's watching, know that I love you and what you're going through is normal, no matter how painful it is. I've been through it and I'm here for you. And stuff does get better, stuff will improve. You know, science is constantly improving and the medical field is constantly working harder to help us. Even while there are pushbacks from people like Donald Trump trying to revoke our health care, we are still strong and we are in this together. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video and have a wonderful day.